Elijah, the prophet who never died. Have you ever heard of a man who never tasted death? A man who walked with fire, challenged kings, and disappeared into the sky. Today, we begin the remarkable journey of Elijah, the prophet who never died. Elijah wasn't born into royalty. He didn't wear fancy robes or live in a palace. He came from a small place called Tishbe in Gilead. Yet, he became one of the most powerful prophets in the Bible, bold, fearless, and chosen by God for a special mission. At a time when the people of Israel were turning away from God and worshipping idols, Elijah stepped onto the scene like a thunderstorm. The king of Israel then, Ahab, had married Jezebel, a woman who introduced the worship of Baal, a false god. She didn't just bring idols, she brought terror, killing prophets of God and silencing the truth. But Elijah, he wasn't afraid. One day, he marched straight into the palace and said something that shook the kingdom. As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, there will be no dew or rain in the next few years except at my word. And just like that, the skies shut down. No rain, no crops, and famine spread across the land. God then told Elijah to hide near a brook called Chariot. And guess what? While the land was dry and hungry, Elijah drank from the brook and was fed by ravens, yes, actual birds bringing him bread and meat every day. That's how God took care of his servant. But this was just the beginning. Elijah's life was filled with miracles, fire from heaven, and showdowns with false prophets. He wasn't just a prophet, he was a living message. And his end? Well, it wasn't an end at all, because Elijah is the prophet who never died. But how did it all happen? What led to the moment he was taken up into the sky? Who was watching when it happened? And why does his story still matter today? Elijah boldly declared a drought, stood against King Ahab, and was fed by ravens during the famine. But Elijah's journey was far from over. In fact, the real fire was about to fall, literally. After years of drought, God sent Elijah back to confront King Ahab. When Ahab saw him, he shouted, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" But Elijah fired back, "I'm not the one causing trouble. You and your family are, because you've abandoned God's commands and followed Baal." Then Elijah made a bold challenge, one that would change everything. He told Ahab to gather all the people of Israel, along with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, and meet him on Mount Carmel. On that mountain, Elijah stood alone, one man against hundreds. He said to the people, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, then follow him." No one said a word. So Elijah set the stage for a dramatic test: 2 bulls, 2 altars, no fire. Each side would pray to their God, and the one who answered with fire, he would be the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. They prayed, danced, and shouted from morning till night. They even cut themselves, hoping Baal would respond. But nothing. No fire. No voice. Just silence. Then Elijah stepped forward. He rebuilt God's altar with 12 stones, poured water all over the offering 3 times, until everything was soaked. Then, with a calm but powerful voice, he prayed, "Lord, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant." Suddenly, fire fell from heaven. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the water, everything. The people fell on their faces and shouted, "The Lord, He is God." That day, Elijah proved that one man, fully obedient to God, is more powerful than a crowd of pretenders. But the battle wasn't over yet. Jezebel, the wicked queen, was furious. She swore to kill Elijah. And for the first time, the prophet who stood unshaken before kings, ran. He fled into the wilderness, tired, afraid, and feeling alone. He sat under a broom tree and cried out to God, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life." But God didn't leave him there. Instead, he sent an angel to feed him, strengthen him, and remind him, "You are not alone." Elijah's story is far from finished. Ahead lies a divine whisper on a mountain, a journey to anoint new kings, and a fiery chariot that will take him away without ever tasting death. Yes, Elijah is the prophet who never died, but why did God take him that way? What message was he sending to the world? Don't miss the next episode right here on the Bible Chronicle. Hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to know that no matter how alone you feel, God still speaks, even in a whisper. Elijah called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel, exposed the lies of Baal, and ran for his life when Queen Jezebel vowed to kill him. The mighty prophet who once stood so boldly was now hiding in fear. But even in that dark moment, God wasn't finished with Elijah. Deep in the wilderness, Elijah traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Mount Horeb, the same mountain where God once spoke to Moses. Elijah found a cave there and spent the night, exhausted and confused. Then God asked him a question, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah poured out his heart. "I've been very zealous for you. But the people have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars and killed your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." But God didn't scold him. Instead, he told Elijah to stand on the mountain. And then, something incredible happened. First, a powerful wind tore through the mountains, but God was not in the wind. Then came a mighty earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. Then came a fire, but God was not in the fire either. And then came a gentle whisper. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was God's voice. That whisper reminded Elijah, and reminds us today, that God doesn't always move in big, flashy ways. Sometimes, he comes quietly, personally, in the stillness of our hearts. After that moment, God gave Elijah a new assignment. He was to anoint new kings in Israel and Syria, and most importantly, he was to find and train a new prophet who would carry on the mission. That's when Elijah met Elisha, a humble farmer plowing the field. Elijah didn't give a long speech. He simply walked up and threw his cloak over Elisha. That one act said it all. "You're chosen." Elisha left everything behind and followed Elijah. From that day on, he served him, learned from him, and became like a son to him. Together, they journeyed from city to city, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, knowing the end of Elijah's time was drawing near. And then, the day came. Elijah and Elisha stood by the Jordan River. Elijah rolled up his cloak, struck the water, and it parted, just like it did for Moses. They crossed on dry ground. Then Elijah turned to Elisha and asked, "What do you want me to do for you before I'm taken away?" And Elisha said something bold, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah smiled. "You've asked a hard thing. But if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours." And then, it happened. As they walked and talked, a chariot of fire appeared, drawn by horses of fire. A whirlwind swept down, and Elijah was taken up into the sky. Elisha watched, shouting, "My father! My father! The chariots and horsemen of Israel!" And just like that, Elijah was gone. No grave. No death. Just fire and glory. But why did God take Elijah this way? Why didn't he die like everyone else? Could it be that God was sending a message? A sign? Is Elijah still part of something bigger, a story yet to unfold? Make sure you're subscribed to the Bible Chronicle, hit the like button, and share this episode with someone who needs a reminder that God still has a plan, even when we can't see the end. Elijah had been taken up in a whirlwind, riding a chariot of fire. He didn't die, he simply vanished, lifted into the heavens by God himself. But that wasn't the last time the world would see Elijah. Centuries passed. Kingdoms rose and fell. The Old Testament closed, and for 400 years, God's voice was silent. Then suddenly, a prophet appeared in the wilderness. His name? John the Baptist. He wore a cloak of camel's hair, lived off locusts and wild honey, and preached boldly, calling people to repent. He didn't just look like Elijah, he carried Elijah's spirit. In fact, before John was even born, an angel told his father Zechariah, "He will go on before the Lord, in the spirit and power of Elijah." People began asking, "Are you Elijah?" But John answered, "I am not." Still, Jesus himself would later say, and if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. But the mystery of Elijah goes even deeper. One day, Jesus took 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, up a high mountain. There, something extraordinary happened. Jesus was transfigured before their eyes. His face shone like the sun, his clothes became dazzling white. And then, appearing out of nowhere, stood Elijah and Moses, talking with Jesus. Can you imagine that moment? Elijah, who had been taken up without dying, standing in glory beside Jesus, centuries later. It was like time folded in on itself, heaven touching earth. Peter, overwhelmed, said, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. Let's build 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But before they could react, a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice thundered from heaven, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." Then, it was over. Elijah and Moses were gone. Only Jesus remained. Why was Elijah there? Because his story isn't just about miracles or fire, it's about preparation. Elijah always came before something great. Before the rain, before the revival, and now, before the revelation of Jesus as the Son of God. But that's not the end of Elijah's legacy. In the very last verses of the Old Testament, the prophet Malachi wrote, "Behold, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes." Some believe Elijah will return again in the end times, as one of the 2 witnesses in the book of Revelation. 2 men clothed in power, calling down fire, turning hearts back to God before the final judgment. Could it be that Elijah still has one more mission? A mission that brings the whole Bible full circle, from kings and prophets to the return of the King himself? One thing is clear, Elijah never died, because his purpose wasn't finished. And maybe, just maybe, it still isn't. Elijah's journey is unlike any other. He was a man who lived with heaven's authority, walked with God's boldness, and spoke with a voice that pierced nations. But beyond the miracles, beyond the fire, beyond the mystery of never dying, there is something far more important about Elijah's story. It's the message he carried. In the days of King Ahab, Elijah cried out, "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him." That same cry echoes through time, into our world today. Because Elijah's mission wasn't just to call down fire, it was to turn hearts back to God. He came in a time of spiritual confusion, when truth was twisted and idols were everywhere. Sound familiar? He stood alone, but he never stood empty. God filled him with power, purpose, and divine backing. Even when he ran in fear. Even when he felt abandoned under that broom tree. Even when he believed he was the only one left. God whispered, "You are not alone." That's the beauty of Elijah's story. It reminds us that God doesn't need crowds to move, he only needs one willing heart. One voice that says, "Here I am, Lord." Elijah shows us that faithfulness matters more than fame, obedience is stronger than fear. And fire always falls on sacrifice. Though he was taken up in a whirlwind. Though he may yet return in the end. Elijah's real legacy isn't just that he never died, it's that he truly lived for God. So, what about you? Will you be bold like Elijah? Will you speak truth in a world chasing lies? Will you stand for God, even if you have to stand alone? Because just like Elijah's voice echoed through the generations, yours can too. This marks the end of our Elijah series, but not the end of the journey here on the Bible Chronicle. If this story stirred something in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, and share this series with someone who needs a reminder that God still uses ordinary people for extraordinary missions. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story we'll uncover, from Scripture's greatest legends to its deepest mysteries. Until next time, remember, you don't have to fear the fire when you walk with the God who answers by fire.